The restaurant went quiet the moment I walked in. Not the whole restaurant, just the table in the corner where my family had already settled into their chairs, their wine glasses half empty, their laughter carrying across the room like they'd been there for hours. Maybe they had. I hadn't checked the time when I left the office. I rarely do. My sister-in-law was the first one to notice me. She leaned toward the woman sitting beside her, her mother, I would learn later, though I hadn't been introduced yet, and said something behind her hand. Not quietly enough. That's the one I told you about, the sad little workaholic. Lives in that tiny apartment. No husband, no prospects. Just works. She laughed softly, like it was the punchline to a joke she'd already told 100 times. Her mother smiled with her teeth showing. I stood at the edge of the room and let it settle over me. On my right wrist, I wore my father's watch, the one he'd asked me to keep for him the week before he died, pressing it into my palm and telling me I was the one who understood the value of things. I had never taken it off. Not once in 4 years. What none of them knew. Not my sister-in-law, not her mother, not even my brother Marcus, who was busy refilling everyone's water glasses and pretending not to have seen me arrive, was that I had made a call to my attorney 2 hours before walking through that door, and that the papers already existed, and that by the end of the night, the thing they had come here to take from me would be the last thing on anyone's mind. Before I tell you what happened, tap like and drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever been the person your family forgot to celebrate, the one who gave without being asked and was thanked with silence, I want to hear from you. Because what unfolded at that dinner table changed everything. And I need you to understand how it started before you can understand why it ended the way it did. My name is Clara Reyes. I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a small house in central Ohio where the heat sometimes didn't work in January, and my father stretched every dollar so far it felt like it might tear. He worked 2 jobs most of my childhood. My mother worked 1 and came home tired. My older brother Marcus had their attention the way oldest children often do. Not because they tried to take it, but because the world made space for them first. I was just always a little behind, a little quieter, a little more willing to wait. My father was the one who taught me how to read a balance sheet. On Sunday mornings, before the rest of the house was awake, he would spread papers across the kitchen table, receipts, utility bills, mortgage statements, and walk me through them like they were sacred texts. Numbers don't lie, Clara, he told me once. People do. But numbers just sit there and tell you exactly what's true. I was 11 years old and I understood that he was trying to give me something he hadn't been given himself. When I was 14, he was diagnosed with a heart condition. Not immediately life-threatening, the doctor said, but something to be watched, something that required medication, something that cost money we were already pretending we had enough of. He never told Marcus. He told me. I don't know why he made that choice. I've thought about it 100 times since, and I still don't know. Maybe he knew I wouldn't try to fix it loudly. Maybe he knew I would just start solving. So I did. I got better grades, applied for scholarships, finished college in 3 years instead of 4. I went into commercial real estate at 23 because it was the fastest road I could see toward the kind of stability my father had spent his whole life building toward and never quite reaching. I was not naturally bold. I was not a risk taker by instinct, but I understood property. I understood how value worked, how it shifted, how to find the thing no one else was looking at yet, and wait for the moment it became what you always knew it was going to be. By 26, I owned 2 properties outright. By 28, 6. I kept a small apartment for myself, drove a car I'd had since graduate school, and wore the same rotation of simple clothes I'd always worn. I didn't talk about what I had built. Not at family dinners, not at holidays, not on the phone with my mother when she called on Sundays and asked if I was seeing anyone and whether I was eating enough. I just kept building, quietly, the way my father had taught me. And I kept sending money home. Every month, automatically, from an account they didn't know existed, routed through a third-party management company I had set up specifically for that purpose, my parents' mortgage payment, their insurance. A supplement that covered my father's medication without question. They thought it was a program, a benefit. Something administrative they had applied for years ago and forgotten about. I never corrected them. My father died 14 months before that dinner. Peacefully, the hospice nurse told us, which is the word they use when someone has had time to make their peace and has chosen to spend the last of their energy doing exactly that. He left behind a house, a small parcel of land adjoining it, and a handwritten letter in his desk drawer addressed to me. I did not share the contents of the letter with anyone. It wasn't necessary. What mattered was what it confirmed, that the land, the property, the decisions about what came next, he wanted in my hands. I had not moved quickly on any of it. I was still deciding, still thinking, still holding the weight of it the way you hold something irreplaceable, carefully and not yet ready to put it down. I did not know, when I walked into that restaurant on a Tuesday evening in November, that my brother's wife had already set something in motion. Marcus had met Diane 3 years earlier at a work conference. She was polished in the way of someone who had learned early that presentation was currency. Good posture, careful vocabulary, the kind of laugh that sounds like it was designed in a room. She was not unkind to me at first. She was something more difficult to name. She was indifferent in a way that felt intentional, like she had assessed me on a spreadsheet somewhere and concluded I was not worth the investment of real warmth. Her family was from Connecticut. Her father had done well in finance. Her mother had opinions about everything and delivered them with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously wrong, or at least had never been told so. When Marcus brought Diane home for the first time, my mother straightened the throw pillows. My father shook her hand and told her it was good to meet her. I watched Diane take in the house, the small rooms, the dated kitchen, the framed school photos on the wall, and smile in a way that didn't reach anywhere useful. They got married 2 years ago. I stood at the reception in a dress I had bought the week before and smiled for every photograph. What I did not know until 6 weeks before that dinner in November, when my family attorney forwarded me a document she had received through a title company, was that Diane's father had been quietly exploring a purchase. Not a random one. My father's land. The parcel my father had left to me in everything but the final signed paperwork, which had been delayed by the probate process that was still, technically, in progress. The inquiry had been routed carefully. Vague language. A holding company name that took my attorney 2 days to trace back to its source. They had gone through 3 intermediaries to obscure the connection to anyone with our last name. It was thorough work. It would have worked, probably, if they had moved a few months faster, before the probate closed, before everything was properly filed. Or if I had been someone who didn't read every document placed in front of me. But I did read them. All of them. My father had taught me that. I sat with what I knew for a week before I decided anything. Then I called my attorney. Then I called a forensic accountant I trusted. Then I let the rest of the process move forward on its own timeline, while I went to work every morning and said nothing to anyone. The dinner in November had been organized by my mother. She liked having us all together. She liked the restaurant because my father had taken her there for their anniversary twice before he got sick, and she had decided it was a good-let place, the kind of location that held the impression of happy things and released them slowly into the room. She had made the reservation herself and told everyone to be there at 7. I arrived at 7:15. I am almost never late. That night I was, because I had been on a call that ran over, and because, if I am being honest, some part of me needed to arrive after everyone else had already settled, needed to see the shape of the room before I stepped into it. Diane's mother, who introduced herself as Patricia when I finally reached the table, with a handshake that lasted exactly as long as it needed to and no longer, was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne. She had the kind of presence that takes up space without moving much. She looked at me the way people look at things they've already decided they don't need to understand. My mother had saved the seat next to her for me. I sat down and unfolded my napkin and smiled and asked how everyone's drive had been. And Diane answered for the table, because Diane usually answered for the table. "Fine," she said. "Easy." Then she looked at my jacket, the one I'd been wearing since that morning, the sensible dark one I always wore to the office, and suggested pleasantly that I must have come straight from work. Her tone made it sound like a character flaw. "Always working," Patricia said, like a diagnosis. "Marcus tells us you're very dedicated." She let the pause do its work. dedicated, and the voice she used sounded like a polite word for someone who had nothing else going on. I said that I enjoyed my work. My mother touched my arm briefly, the way she does when she thinks I need anchoring. Marcus was quieter than usual. I noticed it but didn't comment. He refilled his water glass twice in the first 10 minutes, which he does when he's thinking about something he doesn't want to say out loud. He and I have never been close in the easy, automatic way that some siblings are. But we understood each other. I knew his tells. He knew that I would notice them. The food came. The conversation moved the way dinner conversation does, through topics and away from them, through Diane's job and Marcus's job and my mother's plans to repaint the upstairs hallway. Patricia asked about the house, my mother's house, the one my father had owned, with a casual interest that wasn't quite casual. How large was the property again? And the land next door? That was connected to the estate, wasn't it? Still being sorted out legally? I watched my mother answer warmly, helpfully, with the openness of someone who has no reason to be guarded. And then Diane said it. Not to me directly, to Patricia. But loudly enough, clearly enough, in that voice she used when she wanted something heard but didn't want to be accountable for having said it out loud. The thing is, Clara has never really been interested in the family home. She's very focused on her own portfolio. She paused. It's probably better for everyone if that land gets handled by people who are actually emotionally invested. Don't you think? Patricia agreed immediately, meaningfully. I looked at my brother. He was looking at his plate. There are moments when something becomes fully clear, not because of one thing, but because of the accumulated weight of everything. The call she'd placed to a holding company, the title inquiry, the dinner that had been organized by my mother but shaped, somehow, around this question, and Marcus looking at his plate. I reached for my water glass. I took a slow drink. I set it back down. "Marcus," I said. He looked up. "Did you know about the inquiry on the land?" The table went quiet. Not all at once. In stages, like a room filling with water. His expression told me everything I needed before he opened his mouth. He said he didn't know what I meant. His voice had the careful flatness of someone reciting lines they had rehearsed but didn't fully believe. "There was a purchase inquiry," I said, "through a holding company, on the parcel adjoining Mom's house, the one Dad left to me." I was not angry. I was not sharp. I was calm in the way that only comes from having sat with something long enough that the emotion has moved somewhere quieter inside you, somewhere it can't reach your voice. I was wondering if he knew about it. Diane set down her fork. "Clara." Her tone was measured, the way someone sounds when they think they still have control of the narrative. "This isn't really the place." "I think it's exactly the place," I said. "Since that seems to be why we're all here," Patricia interjected. Warmly, expertly. She said that the family had simply been exploring auctions, that with the estate still unsettled, it made sense to be thinking ahead, that surely I could understand they were only trying to be helpful. She touched Marcus's arm as she said it, including him, making it a team. I looked at my mother. She was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. Not distress, something closer to recognition. "Mom," I said, "I want to show you something." I took out my phone. My attorney had sent everything over the day before, organized and clearly labeled the way she always does, because she knows I will want to show it to someone, and it needs to be easy to understand. I placed the phone on the table and turned it toward my mother. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long time. What she was reading was a transfer history, 4 years of monthly deposits, regular as breathing, into an account that had been paying her mortgage and my father's medication and 3 other expenses she had assumed were administrative benefits she'd forgotten applying for. The amounts. The dates. The account they had originated from, which was mine. "I didn't tell you," I said, "because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I just needed you to be okay." My mother put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry loudly. She is not a loud person. But her eyes filled, and she kept them on the screen, and I watched her recalibrate something she had believed for 4 years. Diane said my name again, differently this time. "The holding company," I said, turning to face her, "is registered to your father's investment firm." The inquiry went through 3 intermediaries, but the paper trail is clear. My attorney has the documentation. I paused. The probate closed last week. The land is mine. Has been, legally, for 7 days. Patricia's warmth evaporated. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was calculation, a quick and visible reassessment. She started to say something about misunderstandings, about good intentions, about the way these things can look a certain way, without meaning what they appeared to mean. I'm not here to litigate it tonight, I said. My attorney will handle the formal response, but I needed my family to know what was being attempted, and I needed them to hear it from me. Marcus said my name. His voice came out differently than it had all evening, stripped of the careful flatness, left with something rougher underneath. He said he hadn't known about the holding company, that Diane had said it was just preliminary research, just exploring, that he thought it was general, not specific, not targeted. I looked at him for a long moment. My brother, who I had grown up alongside in that small house with the heat that didn't always work, who had gotten the louder portion of my parents' attention without ever asking for it and without ever quite noticing the cost. I believed him. He looked like a man who had been shown a door he thought was something else entirely. I know, I said, and I meant it. Diane stood up. She said that I was making accusations, that I was doing what I always did, turning myself into a victim, making everything about me and my feelings, and hadn't she always tried? Hadn't she made every effort? You said tonight that I was never emotionally invested in the family home, I said. I've been paying the mortgage on it for 4 years. The table absorbed that. Diane sat back down. Patricia excused herself to make a phone call. She walked toward the front of the restaurant with the careful composure of someone who has been in difficult situations before and knows how to exit them gracefully. I watched her go and then turned back to my mother, who was still looking at her hands. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked. She was not accusing me. She was asking a real question, the way she used to ask real questions when I was small, sitting at the edge of my bed at night. "Because you would have tried to pay me back," I said. "And you couldn't. And I didn't want you to feel like you were failing at something you weren't failing at. You were fine. You just had help you didn't know about." She reached across the table and took my hand. She held it the way my grandmother used to hold hands, a second longer than necessary, like she was grounding something in the world. I had not expected that. I had expected relief, maybe, or surprise. I had not expected to feel the specific texture of that gesture and recognize it. Marcus stayed at the table after Diane left to join her mother near the front. He and I sat with my mother and the remnants of a meal that no one was going to finish, and he said very little for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. Simply, without architecture or defense. Just, "I'm sorry, Clara. I should have asked you directly. I should have asked a long time ago." I told him that sorry was a starting point, not a destination. He nodded once, like he was filing that somewhere. We paid the check. My mother kept my hand for most of it. On the way out, she looked at the watch on my wrist, my father's watch, and reached out and touched the face of it gently with one finger, the way you touch something you haven't let yourself look at directly for a while. "He gave that to you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "The week before," I said. She nodded. "He always knew," she said. "He just didn't always know how to say it out loud." We stood in the parking lot for a moment in the November cold, the 3 of us, without anyone filling the silence with something unnecessary. The restaurant light fell through the window onto the pavement. Somewhere behind us, I could hear Patricia's voice, still on the phone, still composed, still working the problem. She would find another approach. People like that always do. But the land was mine now, legally and finally, and there was nothing more to work around. The formal response went out through my attorney the following Monday. Clean, thorough, final. There were no further inquiries. There was a brief period of uncomfortable communication between Marcus and Diane, which he handled on his own in the way that married people handle the difficult things, mostly out of sight, with consequences that drift back slowly over time. Patricia and I have never spoken directly again. I don't expect we will. My mother and I talk more now. Real conversations, not the careful Sunday calls where she asked if I was eating, and I said yes, and neither of us said anything that cost us anything. She came to visit me in the spring, and I showed her what I had been building, the properties, the systems, the small but real architecture of something that had taken years to construct. She walked through each one the way my father used to walk through ideas, slowly, asking questions, trying to understand not just the surface, but the structure underneath. She told me she wished she'd asked sooner. I told her that the door had always been open. She said she hadn't known to knock. I said that was fair, and I meant it, and we left it there. I still wear my father's watch, not because I need the reminder anymore. I know my own worth now in a way that doesn't require a physical anchor, but because it was his, and because he put it in my hand on purpose, and because some things are worth carrying forward, not for what they prove, but for what they represent. The continuity of a person who saw something in you and wanted you to know it. Marcus called me 6 weeks after the dinner, just to talk. No agenda. He asked about work, asked about the properties, asked a question about real estate that he could have looked up but chose to ask me instead. It lasted 40 minutes. I don't think either of us said anything particularly significant. But he called. He asked. He listened to the answers. That mattered more than I expected it to. There is a version of the story where I walked into that dinner and stayed in the corner and let them talk over me and went home and said nothing and added it to the long list of moments I had survived quietly and moved past. I had been doing that my whole life. I was good at it. It is a useful skill until the moment it stops being useful, and then it becomes a habit of disappearing that no one benefits from, least of all you. I am not a person who enjoys confrontation. I am not built for it the way some people are. The ones who find conflict clarifying rather than costly. But I am a person who reads every document placed in front of her. I am a person who inherited a watch and a letter and a way of understanding the world from a man who stretched every dollar and worked 2 jobs and spent Sunday mornings at a kitchen table teaching me that numbers just sit there and tell you exactly what's true. He was right about that. He was right about most things. The land is mine. The work is mine. The years of quiet investment, all of it, mine. Not because I fought for it loudly, but because I built it carefully, and because being underestimated for long enough can, if you let it, teach you something extremely valuable about the distance between what people assume and what's actually true. If you've ever been the person your family treated as an afterthought, the one who held everything together from the back of the room while someone else stood at the front of it, I want you to know that what you're building is real, even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching. Leave your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if tonight's story resonated with you, subscribe, because what comes next is something I haven't told anyone yet.